is reinstated.
Open sesame!
Commander Klingon vessel. We are energizing transporter beam. Now.
One, engage!
Okay, welcome everyone to Star Trek from the Holodeck. This is the Strange New Worlds edition, and I'm your host, Michael. And at the helm, navigating through asteroids and pirates, is Ensign David Sybok. Hello.
Hello, everybody.
So are we safe from pirates?
Yes, for now.
Okay. All right. How about butt pirates?
Don't worry, I'll keep those ones away.
Butt pirates?
I'll keep the butt pirates
Yeah,
away.
I'll take one for the team, Mike, and I will handle them personally.
Especially if it's Angel.
Oh, wow. All right. Just right out the gate. David getting perverted over there. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about Season 1, Episode 7, Strange New Worlds, titled The Serene Squall. The synopsis: while on a dangerous humanitarian mission, the crew of the USS Enterprise stumbles into a harrowing game of leverage with the quadrant's deadliest space pirates. Directed by Sidney Freeland, written by Bo DeMaio and Sarah Tarkoff. Well, Dave, we don't need to play coy. They've done it. We've talked about it since Star Trek Discovery Season 1. The question we've posed since day one of the Kirkman era, when it was revealed that Michael Burnham would be related to Spock. We asked, how long will it be before they bring Sybok into the equation? And here we are.
And here we are.
Did you expect for it to happen in this series in Season 1?
Not in Season 1.
We make a lot of jokes, Dave, but I really didn't think they would do it.
Not in Season 1, Mike. Because, I'm sorry, that seemed like, okay, that'd be, way too much rushing. You got to ease us in.
Yeah.
You gotta lube up first before you go straight in.
Yeah.
Don't just, force this on us.
Well, with the announcement of Strange New Worlds, we found ourselves facing the real possibility of Sybok being used as a way to help shape Spock's early years. We had talked about it the moment it was announced. We had said, well, we thought we might see it in Discovery. We didn't, but now here we are with Strange New Worlds. We have been saying, I can't remember if it was during our pre-shows that's available on Patreon, or if it was on our regular shows, but we have been discussing, will it happen? And now here we are. And I feel like this is more than appropriate because as it turns out, this series is exploring the intricacies of Spock's journey into self-discovery.
Yes.
These are the moments in his life when he's trying to figure out who he is, should be, and wants to be. And when you pay attention, you take all that, pay attention to what the writers are doing with Spock, a logical next step is to throw into the mix a chaotic element like Sybok.
Oh yeah, dude, when I was thinking that basically we would see maybe some allusions to Sybok down the line when Spock is when we're more deep into Spock's story about being a basically a child of two worlds.
Right.
Where they're talking about his humanity versus his Vulcan side. And that's why I got really giddy when, Dr. Aspen basically during that scene was talking to Spock and discussing about the whole adage of him dealing with his human side, his emotional side, and his Vulcan logical side. Mm-hmm. And talking about being essentially being a child of two worlds. And I was going, okay, we could use this as a start point for that storyline, but not use Sybok yet till Season 2 when Spock is fully into it. Instead, we, just like you said, we get Sybok right away, and now we get this sense. I got the sense, especially after this episode, that this is what kind of molds Spock into who he is.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. Now that we're seeing actually on screen this play out, it makes even more sense than we had been discussing. Because when you really analyze who Sybok is and was in Star Trek The Final Frontier, this is a perfect foil to challenge or pose questions concerning Spock's complicated identity and how he perceives himself and how he wants to be perceived by others.
Well, dude, after I watched this episode, I immediately put on Star Trek: The Final Frontier. Like, I just started watching. I rewatched that, and I just put it on while I was working. And basically, I look at that movie now differently because I always had this sense that Sybok and the relationship between Sybok and Spock is not really like the stereotypical villain hero type of relationship. Sybok to me has always been that foil to Spock, especially now looking at it and seeing that you have one brother who is completely logical, and we know that Spock turns into that logical being, especially by the time he gets to Star Trek the Motion Picture, right? Meanwhile, we have his illegitimate brother, who is the complete opposite.
It's an interesting dichotomy.
It's an interesting dichotomy, and especially when you rewatch that movie, I know people didn't like that movie, but now I look back at that movie and see that's actually a really important moment for Spock's relationships, not just with himself, but like actually looking at how young Spock was very broken. You know, like it isn't until he gets to meet Kirk and McCoy and creates a quote unquote family
And discovers who he is.
and discovers who he
and
is.
who he wants to be. This is the moment in his life that he's still trying to figure who he is and how he identifies. Now, David, just to create a little bit of context here, there may be some new Star Trek listeners out there or Star Trek viewers out there who aren't entirely up on who Sybok is. Sybok is a character that was introduced in the 1989 Star Trek film, Star Trek: The Final Frontier, which was the 5th Star Trek film for the original series, which, David, in my opinion, it's on record, I've said this many, many times, is a very flawed but equally underrated Star Trek film. It was a film that had a relatively simple plot, but had a great deal of the philosophical sprinkled throughout. And one such idea, or rather possibly a question that was presented, which I have always found incredibly interesting. Given the opportunity, would you remove all the pain from your life, or is there meaning and purpose to be derived from suffering? Does it, for better or worse, make us who we are? To me, this has always felt like an offshoot of Nietzsche's thought experiment called eternal recurrence. It was used as such a beautiful way to create a moment for Spock in Star Trek: The Final Frontier that really split or dissected, I should say, his character in a way that we really hadn't seen done. Now, we know that he's always struggled between his humanity and his Vulcan side. Yeah. But it was made more tangible via the inclusion of a brother, which obviously is Sybok. Now, the scene in question has to be played.
Now learn something about yourself. No.
This is what Sybok is about, and this will help you new listeners out there to either remind themselves, or this may be new, it will show you what Sybok's ideology is really about.
Jim, try to be open about this.
About what? I've made the...
You know what? I'm having audio issues here, Dave, so talk for a moment.
Well, the thing that I'm glad that you're bringing this up is because I think that for the longest time, the idea in Star Trek 4 that a lot of Star Trek fans didn't like was
Star Trek 5.
Or Star Trek 5 was the fact that Spock kept this secret to himself. Like, he wouldn't tell Kirk, he wouldn't tell McCoy. And everyone constantly. I always remember Star Trek fans going, Spock would never do this. He'd never keep that secret from Kirk and McCoy about his family. I'm like going, you guys do realize that Spock is a being of complete logic. And that's where I always said, people think it's a silly moment when Spock looks at Kirk in that movie and says, well, you never asked.
Well, first off, Spock isn't what you would call an open book.
He's not an open book.
The guy isn't going to go around sharing personal details about his life.
Exactly.
So I never had a problem with this. I understand that Star Trek fans had a field day when this movie came out.
Mm-hmm. And it was hated. It was panned, Mike. I remember that. But when after watching it multiple times, because I'm a Star Trek fan and I love just rewatching every single movie, no matter how I feel it might be bad.
Mm-hmm.
After a while, when I actually looked at Star Trek: The Final Frontier, I was like going, this is actually a very powerful personal story that people aren't really paying attention to.
They sacrifice plot for character. I feel like Star Trek V, if it was reviewed or analyzed through the perspective of, let's say you're reviewing or analyzing Star Trek V as a character study, then it's a flawless film.
It's a flawless
If you're
film.
looking at it and trying to judge it based on traditional plot structure, then you're probably going to pan it. But because it does have a very loose plot. That's the flawed aspect when you're looking at traditional ways of writing. But I don't feel like the inadequacies, let's call them, had anything to do with lack of talent or skill or a concise idea behind the film. I don't feel like people were adjusted to this idea, especially coming off of Star Trek IV, which was a bit of a satire, as opposed to any real development behind characters. This took a step back in that regard, was void of humor, and was more focused on Spock, and had a lot to say philosophically about the dichotomy of logic and emotion. Here's the audio I have.
Jim, try to be open about this.
About what? I've made the wrong choices in my life? I turned left when I should have turned right? I know what my weaknesses are. I don't need Sybok to take me on a tour of them.
If you just unbend and all.
And be brainwashed by this con man?
I was wrong. This con man took away my pain.
Damn it, Bones, you're a doctor. You know that pain and guilt can't be taken away with the wave of a magic wand. They're the things we carry with us, the things that make us who we are. If we lose them, we lose ourselves. I don't want my pain taken away. I need my pain.
Sybok, this is
most favorite Kirk moment.
One of the most
outside of Khan, dude.
Without a doubt, David. It is one of the most underrated scenes in all of Star Trek. That scene right there with William Shatner and the passion, it was less over the top. It was more subtle.
It was
when you
personal.
listen to something like that and you watch it, I find it hard to believe that so many Star Trek fans to this day continue to shit on this movie. It's currently sitting at 22% on Rotten Tomatoes. Come on.
And that's not fair, because like when you think about it, especially that moment when Kirk says that in that movie, everyone just like pans it. Everyone basically overlooks it.
Mm-hmm.
But in actuality, Kirk is right. If you take away his pain, that means take away the tragedy of losing his son, losing his best friend, going back to even saying like the original series, and going back to the one episode that is considered the greatest Star Trek film of all time, in City on the Edge of Forever. Take away that pain of him watching a person he loves die, and he can't do anything. Take all of that away, and you don't have Captain Kirk.
Well, that's why I had started this little bit here, this segment, with the idea that that Star Trek V is closely associated with Friedrich Nietzsche's thought experiment, Eternal Recurrence, which is about living through your pain, over and over and over and over. I was very young when this movie came out, but I still remember the controversy surrounding the Sybok character. People didn't like the alleged disruption of continuity. I can't remember what it was called, but there was some Star Trek fanzine that my mom bought for me regularly, and it had all the latest Trek news, interviews, gossip, almost like a modern day geek blog.
Yes.
But of course, those things didn't exist in the early 90s, late 80s. But my point is that in the back of the magazine, there were letters from random fans.
Yes.
And I remember it was just filled with Final Frontier criticism. And as we have said now numerous times, I do not feel like it's warranted. This film is way above a 22% on Rotten Tomatoes. I'm not even going to give a percentage because I probably am going to plan a discussion review on this film and break it down with an analytic lens and really get into the ins and outs of the movie. But this episode, Dave, bringing it back to the show itself, Strange New Worlds, this episode being predominantly designed to explore Spock's internal conflict and the disharmony between the human and Vulcan sides and the insecurities that comes with that. It feels, as I had said at the top of the show, more than appropriate to use a character like Sybok in this series, as I'm sure this is just the beginning of a much larger story arc. And perhaps at the end of this, Dave, it'll create a greater appreciation for a movie that has always gone underneath the radar.
Yes. I think so, because like, especially nowadays, since the advent of Discovery and then further building on the mythos of Spock as a young character, and then throwing in things like Burnham as his sister, now Sybok as his illegitimate half-brother, it makes more sense why Spock turns out the way he does and why it takes that relationship with him and Kirk and McCoy to really make him a perfect quote-unquote being.
I like that you said that, Dave, because I agree with you 100%.
Because it strengthens that mythos.
Yes. And it also strengthens a lot of the things we know about Spock. It helps us or nudges the audience to look at things possibly from a different perspective. And then there are those moments where we go, aha, that makes a lot more sense. And I feel the same way when it comes to the idea that the producers had that so many people shit on, which is Burnham being the sister of Spock. There were a lot of fans who still say and did say during season 2 of Discovery that they're going to dilute the importance of Kirk and McCoy and the relationship that played a big part, or that, and the fact that relationship between those two individuals played such a big part in the shaping of Spock. But I disagree. I don't think it dilutes it. If anything, it reaffirms and strengthens
it,
that relationship.
Because Spock made that choice as a young person to keep every single detail of him to himself. And in a way, Mike, that makes sense.
Yes.
I mean, logically, Spock, just like what you said, as a logical person, you're not going to go out there and just spill out your life to everybody that you see.
Right.
You're just not. And it brings it to parallel that moment in Final Frontier when Kirk gets so angry at Spock and tells him, "Why didn't you tell me you had a brother?" And he seems offended, and Spock's only answer, and now looking at it, makes so much sense for that character, is Spock like going, "Well, you never asked." Logically, Spock is a logical being. That makes complete sense.
Yeah.
No one ever asked him about his patronage or family, especially if, hey, do you have a sister? No, you're not going to ask that with Spock.
Right.
You're not, because Spock as a character is a person that lives in the now, because that's what logic dictates.
Yeah. The Burnham stuff from Discovery season 2 and the part that aspect still plays in Spock's storyline, as we have seen in this season of Star Trek. Then, of course, hopefully with the introduction of Sybok, And if they do this properly, which so far so good, if anything, this helps solidify the fact that Kirk and McCoy were very important parts in Spock's life, because it wasn't until he met them that he felt confident in who he was as a person. At this time, he's insecure. He's not sure who he should be. He's not sure who he wants to be. That's something that plays a big part in his life. Or I should say, that's why Star Trek: The Final Frontier, I feel, seamlessly works very well into what we're seeing the writers do on Strange New Worlds.
Yeah.
It was heavily implied in Final Frontier that Sybok had tried to convince Spock before to reject the parochial teachings, of Vulcan logic and embrace emotions. And this is why the use of Angel as the pirate captain and her connection to Sybok was so interesting, because we can assume she was aware of who Spock was and was essentially undermining Spock's path to logic by filling his head with ideology born of Sybok's teachings.
I hit myself in the head, Mike, after I watched the episode, because I was like, why didn't I see this? Because it'd be one thing if Angel was just basically being antagonistic to Spock.
Yeah.
But when you actually take a step back, the way she approaches Spock is the same way his relationship with Sybok is. It's not an antagonistic role. It's two people on two different sides of the spectrum
presenting a different view.
That's not to say that Spock, I think a lot of people have this misinterpretation of Spock and Sybok's relationship where they hate each other. They don't hate each other. They're still brothers, but they just are from two different points of view.
Well, and
or opposing points of view even.
And that's where it gets complicated. And if you want to learn more about the Vulcan culture, one of the best Star Trek series to watch is Enterprise.
Yeah.
Because Enterprise dissects the prejudice of the Vulcan culture.
Yes.
Now, that prejudice comes with a lot of complications.
And baggage.
We understand, for those people out there who may not be aware, the Vulcans do have emotions. I feel like that's a misconception. A lot of people think they don't have emotions.
But they do.
They have emotions, but they work their damnedest to purge them or suppress them, because in order for their culture to live in peace, they realize that they have to do that, because they're a highly emotional species. It's actually the opposite. They're so passionate and emotional that it had created massive problems within their culture. So their solution was to suppress their emotions and use logic as a way to guide their ideological practices for their culture.
And I think that's something that a lot of fans misinterpret about Star Trek and the Vulcan history. Is they say, oh, they just ignore their emotions. No, they have rituals that they have to undergo to remove or suppress within themselves their emotional state. I mean, me and you just saw recently, a couple of weeks ago, the motion picture. One of the biggest things,
the 4K restoration on the big screen
restoration
was amazing.
And one of the major elements of that movie is Spock undergoing the whole ritual of suppressing his emotions.
The Kolinar.
The Kolinar.
Yeah.
And it's an important ritual for all Vulcans everywhere.
Yeah.
And then it's a big deal that he basically stops it. He suddenly just, during that whole thing, says, no, this is not what I was looking for.
Right. Well, and Dave, that's an interesting point that you make, because that obviously, I feel like a bit of this episode was foreshadowing that decision in the motion picture when Angel, or let's call her Dr. Aspen, I guess.
Dr. Aspen.
She even went as far as questioning Spock on his quest to purge all emotions, because the idea of the Kolinar was brought up in this episode.
Dude, I was so giddy when they brought it up.
It felt like they were foreshadowing things to come, because, as you mentioned, the purging of emotions, or the Kolinar, as the Vulcans call it, does in fact play a big part in Spock's story in Star Trek the motion picture. In fact, there's an article from Screen Rant that perfectly summarizes this aspect better than I can word it, so I'm just going to read it verbatim. In Star Trek the motion picture, Spock left Starfleet in order to undergo the Kolinar, which is the purging of all emotions. Spock was at the final point of the Kolinar ritual when he sensed V'ger, the artificial intelligence, en route to Earth to find its creator. Spock later confessed to Admiral James T. Kirk that he felt a bond to V'ger as a fellow sentient being who questioned his very existence.
Yes.
Spock even wept for V'ger like a brother. It was because of the connection Spock felt to V'ger that he failed the Kolinar.
Yes.
Spock ultimately learned that ridding himself of all emotion would have been a mistake, and he never attempted the Kolinar again. In Star Trek The Undiscovered Country, Spock attempted to convey the sum of his wisdom to his protege, that was played by Kim Cattrall,
Yes.
that logic is the beginning of wisdom, not the end. The half-human Spock had come to reconcile his humanity and knew that devoting himself to a purely logical existence would have been a grave error.
Yeah.
So
And if
they
you
are.
think
I love that the Strange New Worlds writers are taking everything that we know as Spock and essentially just laying down the groundwork to get to that point. And this is what I was hoping they were going to do. When you're dealing with characters like this, these are legacy characters. I'm not one for fan service, Dave.
Yeah.
I know there are a lot of fans of different fandoms who that's kind of like all they seem to want is fan service things. I'm not for that. And don't get me wrong, I'm a Star Trek geek at heart, and a little bit of fan service makes me, I'd be lying if I were to say I don't like fan service. But the academic, the critic in me always pushes back on simply fan service unless it has substance that comes with it. And when you introduce a new version of Spock like they're doing here, they have to be very careful with how they flesh out certain ideas. And so far, these writers are taking things that we know as Spock and simply recontextualizing, not changing, recontextualizing so that we get a slightly different perspective and we get a peek of things to come.
Yes. And you know what would be amazing? Now that they've opened Pandora's box, in my opinion, about Sybok.
Well, hold on here. Don't say Pandora's box. That's like a...
Well, now that they... that's true. Now that they opened the
well, you know what? Let's go ahead. Say Pandora's box because it can still fall apart horribly.
That is a good point. But like with the story of Sybok, it'd be really cool for them to jump into the opposite side of the spectrum.
Yeah.
While Spock is dealing with being a being of complete logic and fighting this urge of emotions and coming to the terms in his story that emotions, you can't purge all emotion. It'd be cool to all of a sudden you parallel that with Sybok's story where it's like you can embrace all your emotions, but you can't let go of your logic. Because if you look at, especially after I watched the final frontier with the story of Sybok and Spock, the problem with Sybok was he embraced all emotion, but he purged himself of logic, and that left him to be manipulated by the almighty being of Shakari.
I think the idea behind the two is that when you look at Sybok and Spock as parallels, and the fact that they are on complete opposite sides of a spectrum, I think the message here is that you need balance.
You need balance.
I think that's the point, right?
And the only cheesy part that I think that I don't want them to say, Mike, is the fact that Spock right now, currently, is not the perfect balance. Sybok is not the perfect balance. But Burnham...
Oh, come on.
Burnham's the perfect balance.
We know she's not.
And
she's
yes,
highly emotional.
I don't want them to say that.
Yeah.
That's the only thing.
They're not going to. Come on. But overall, I'm really liking how the Strange New Worlds writers are paying close attention to the details. It all feels very seamless and consistent. In the motion picture, director Robert Wise, as well as the writer Alan Dean Foster, which by the way is amazing that he wrote that film.
And not many people realize that, dude. Alan Dean Foster, one of the greatest sci-fi writers.
Motion picture also
extremely
underrated. That film is sitting at, it's such a fucking farce.
I hate humanity.
49%.
I hate humanity, Mike. I hate humanity.
It's just not. It's not right. It's not accurate.
It's not
I'm sorry,
fair.
but 49% isn't fucking accurate.
No, it's not.
But we're digressing again here. But the writer Alan Dean Foster, as well as the director Robert Wise, were set on creating a type of existential crisis for Spock.
Mm-hmm.
That was the beautiful thing about the Kulinar scene. It caused him to question who he was. And that's exactly the type of consistency we are getting in Strange New Worlds. Connecting dots and smoothing out story elements from decades ago.
Yes.
That's what they're doing. And all of this worked. You know, it worked in the background. It was used in conjunction and informing the episode's narrative and plot. So taking those elements that Robert Wise and Alan Dean Foster had used way back in 1979, I believe, is when the motion picture was released.
Yeah.
And we have the Strange New Worlds writers taking these aspects and using them to help create the thematic aspects used in the episode, to create the plot itself, the story. You have Chapel and Spock's relationship as friends. It's going to become more and more complicated after this episode.
Yeah.
You have that kiss between the two of them, though it was meant to deceive the pirate captain. And it ended up proving to Chapel that she does, in fact, have deep feelings for Spock. And it rattled Spock, too. That was also clear, because at that moment, he also realized there's something happening between the two of them.
Yes.
And that works yet again with who Spock wants to be, how he perceives himself to be, and how he wants to be perceived, which is someone who is obligated to duty and responsibility. And for him to have feelings or admit that he has feelings for someone who he is not betrothed to goes against who he wants, to be. Also because he clings to his Vulcan side, to take on a relationship with, say, a human would also go against how he wants to be perceived. So all of these elements are working in tandem to create this beautiful, complicated picture, a character study, essentially, of Spock. So when you look at it from that perspective, this episode was exceptional from numerous aspects. The writers use a lot of that stuff from Chapel and Spock perfectly to show the audience the emotions it stirred up, which will further complicate Spock's perception of himself, his identity, and the expectations he places on himself.
Yeah.
It's really hard to complain about an episode like this. It served, as I said, as an excellent character study. There was also some slightly sad moments, knowing that T'Pring and Spock are not meant to be. That's not a spoiler.
Yeah.
The more we get with T'Pring, the more her edges are softened, because in the original series, she was just unlikable.
Yes.
You were like, good. See you later. How dare you try to cheat on Spock?
Well, there's so many
makes that
stories in the original series that she kind of turns into a villain. So, because
was there? I thought it was just that one Amok time.
No, it not a true villain, but basically, like, just like you said, she becomes unlikable.
She's unlikable because of we like Spock. He's a good character, and you give us this episode where she essentially admits that she doesn't want anything to do with him, that he's too human for her, and that she'd rather have a pure-blooded Vulcan as her husband.
Yeah.
which says a lot about their culture as well as T'Pring.
As T'Pring.
And I always viewed her as unlikable. And I remember when they announced that T'Pring would play a big part in Strange New Worlds, I had said, well, she's an unlikable character, so I don't give a fuck. But as the season progresses, again, recontextualizing things. We now see other perspectives, and she is a lot more likable.
Yes.
Because they're softening those edges, and it does make you go back and look at the episode Amok Time from the original series very differently.
Yes.
Story B was mostly designed for levity, and it worked. After this episode, David, it's probably, tell me if you disagree, it's probably safe to say that Captain Pike is far more playful than any of our other captains.
Yes, yes, and yes.
I like this because it creates a distinction.
It does.
It also justifies the type of rapport he has with his crew.
Yeah.
Which is a little more casual.
A little more casual, and it's almost...
But it's not Discovery casual, where there's no leadership or hierarchy, and everyone disobeys each other.
It's very different than saying, like, with Kirk and his crew, especially, yes, he's close with the core crew. But in actuality, Kirk is kind of like, the standing captain. He's the military captain, right?
But he was also straight-faced.
He was straight-faced. You get Picard, who is totally like an admiral. He's
right.
He's totally military, totally by the book, and everyone puts Picard on Enterprise on a pedestal. Like you're not supposed to hang out with Captain Picard because that's weird. Because he's the captain.
There was a clear hierarchy.
There's a clear hierarchy
on Enterprise. What, D?
Yes.
Yes, with
and
Picard.
We've gone through the whole breakdown of each captain. Pike is turning into just kind of like what you alluded to. He looks at all his crew members as just as important as him.
And he's more playful. I think that's the clear distinction. Because all of our captains are always going to have some similarities when it comes to duty and responsibility and their abilities as a captain and whether or not they are tacticians, if they are intelligent, as commanders of vessels. I mean, that's always going to be pretty similar from captain to captain. We're not going to have a TV show where we have a complete inept captain. Unless, go ahead and say it.
Except Archer.
Oh, he wasn't inept. He was just very naive and silly at times. But what they're doing with Pike is they're giving him his own character, his own character traits that are unique to him, which is the playful side.
But also tying it to his relationship with his crew. I mean, dude, that scene when he's doing all the pirate things and Una tells him to stop.
Yeah, she just says, please stop.
Please stop.
Doesn't even turn around. And just says, please stop. And she has a slight little smile on her face. And I love moments like that because it stresses to the audience that they have a very long history together.
Exactly.
And that she has become accustomed to Pike's
weirdness,
childish jokes. Because David, if I was a captain, I would do the exact same thing. I'd be doing, pirates, arr, there be pirates.
Arr. Dude,
but I love the interplay between Pike and Una. It's written in such a way that it really brings out the close relationship the two of them obviously have. For example, that Boy Scout moment when Dr. Aspen says Starfleet calls you a Boy Scout, and Pike's all, no, they don't. Like, kind of like slightly embarrassed.
Yeah.
And then Una's all, it's actually in your file.
It's actually in your file. And it's like those moments are really cool.
Yeah.
And
those are
great. This might be jumping the gun, Mike, but I'm sorry. Up to this point, I've always felt I would love to be, with Captain Picard on the Enterprise because I know I'm going to...
When you say with Picard, you mean like with him?
No, not with him.
Okay.
But like one of the crew of that Enterprise, right?
Yeah.
I've always wanted to do that because Picard just seems to be the perfect teacher.
He's not fun, though.
But he's not fun.
No. Come on.
At this point, I'm going to say my favorite captain, just personally, has to be Pike. He likes 1950s schlocky sci-fi films. He basically doesn't really take a lot of things seriously.
He takes his duty.
He takes
his duty and responsibility as a Starfleet captain serious.
But when it comes to basically personally working with him,
His personal interactions.
no, he's a totally laid back captain.
Yeah.
And then you get this moment. Oh my God. When he starts acting as a pirate, I'm like, yeah, let's do it. Let's try to act like pirates.
This is the Enterprise I would like to serve.
Yes.
On, because
I would like to serve under this
Not only
Enterprise.
is he fun, but also he knows how to pick a crew. I mean, Chapel, Una, Leanne, Uhura. I mean, Spock. It's just too much hotness
There's too much hotness
on the bridge.
On that bridge.
But I would gladly sit on that navigation console and be the ugly duckling of the
You're
group.
the ugly.
As long as I'm surrounded by beauty, I'm okay with that. Makes me feel better about myself.
Well, because your hotness goes up exponentially by the people around you.
Well, okay, so if you're surrounded by 10s and you're like, let's say I'm a 3, I go up.
You go to a 6.
No, like a 4.5. 4.5, 5. Just by default by being around 10s. And I need every chance I can get. I need
every chance you can get.
I need all the help I can get. So if I can go up, 1.5 points, then I'll take it.
Well, also you got to throw in the fact that maybe you could get a sympathy betting.
Oh,
one
that's
of the
right.
Hot 10s. I mean, I'd be like going, okay, if I can at least bed one of the 10s.
Oh, wow.
Then I go up from like what you said, a 4 to 5 to maybe a 6.
That sounds very sexist and masculine.
Because people will look at me and go, oh my God, do you know that he had sex with so-and-so? He must be awesome in bed. Then your level goes up a bit.
I would battle Spock for Chapel.
Chapel.
I'm like, you don't appreciate her.
Go away.
It's so fucking childish and stupid. So overall, the episode was, I think, a very good addition to the season. The showrunner for Strange New Worlds has managed in just 7 episodes to create a fascinating backdrop. There are a lot of things on simmer. The writers are going to be able to use these things, obviously, for future episodes. This is how you write television.
Yeah.
Don't always bring a finite closure to every episode. When it comes to the immediate narrative, the story of that episode, yes, bring that to an end. But when it comes to setting things up, if you want your show to have life and anticipated life as the seasons go by, then you have to set these things up. And now we have so much already set up in the background. And now we have the introduction of Sybok. I really hope they use this aspect in a much bigger way.
Yeah.
Perhaps creating a several episode arc that serves as an emotional myth arc of sorts. Something.
Oh, yeah.
I can definitely see them doing it. Obviously, it's safe to say that they're not going to introduce Sybok
Right away.
during the last 30 seconds of an episode. They didn't never go back to him. They're obviously setting something bigger up that we'll get to eventually. Perhaps not this season. We only have roughly 3 episodes left this season. So they could almost do it as a season finale type 2-parter that bleeds into the season 2 premiere, like the old days of Trek, like the Berman era of TNG and Deep Space Nine Voyager time frame.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll see what happens. The pirate captain, Angel, is an interesting new element, played by Jesse James Keitel, which I want to say she is 3 times removed from the actor Harvey Keitel. So she is related. I want to say it's his cousin, But this actor has been around for quite some time. I'm actually currently watching a show where she's the lead called Big Sky.
Big Sky.
That is on ABC. It's a network television show, but it's it's good for a network television show. So I was aware of what this character, or I should say this actor, can do. So when they announced that that Keitel would be in this episode, I was looking forward to it because she's got some great range.
Oh, she does. And I honestly feel I was so happy that Angel got away, because that means that she'll come back. There's that opportunity that we might see that character again.
She's definitely coming back.
Because, like, it's one of those things that me and you have discussed on past shows, is like many shows kill off their villains, and then you're like left going, man, I really wish they didn't kill them off, because you could have brought them back.
This is their opportunity to create a villain of sorts that is specific to this series. Every series needs that villain. And it's something we've talked about, David, with Star Trek Discovery. My biggest problem with Star Trek Discovery is that they still have not introduced an iconic villain yet.
Yes.
Every series in Star Trek has had that iconic villain. Discovery is the only series so far that hasn't introduced their own iconic villain. And if Strange New Worlds can do that with, say, someone like Captain Angel, who, you know, we've barely scraped the tip of the iceberg for their character, and now you have this character connected to Sybok, they're in a relationship of sorts. I'm anticipating this. I'm hoping they continue with this storyline.
I hope so too, because like I think that the character of Angel could easily be kind of like Strange New Worlds version of Harry Mudd. That type of character that keeps showing up, that keeps coming back, and we keep waiting in anticipation. How is the crew of the Enterprise going to thwart this villain? You know, because the one thing that basically I have stated before about Discovery, they come up with some great villains, but then they write them off.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you have to come up with a brand new villain.
Right.
And they did it even at the last season of Discovery, when they created the one doctor in the very end that was paired up with Book.
As well as Unknown Species 10C.
10C.
They had two possibilities there.
And they just basically wrote them out because they were like going, nah, we'll come up with a different villain. I want to see Star Trek return to the idea of bringing back like these villains that could be recurring roles.
Mm-hmm.
The best Star Trek series that ever did it was Deep Space Nine.
In literature, Dave, there's a common saying when it comes to certain types of stories that involve an antagonistical force. A protagonist is only as good as their villain.
Yes.
That's why Captain Kirk pops in his era, because of his animosity towards the Klingons. The reason why Picard's story really didn't take root until he was assimilated by the Borg.
Mm-hmm.
It's why Archer didn't become interesting until the Xindi. It is why Voyager didn't fully find itself until the introduction of 7 of 9, which created more of an element of self-discovery and introduced the Borg in a very different way than TNG.
Yes.
They used them differently. I mean, I can go on and on. Deep Space Nine, and of course, The Dominion. That show really didn't find itself until they created a consistent or cohesive villain out of the Dominion and the Founders. And then, of course, Gul Dukat. And the part he played in all of that mess. That is why shows like Star Trek need that, because a lot of the narrative cues or story cues used to create some of the best Star Trek stories in history are moments taken from, or I should say, inspirational cues taken from Shakespeare. Shakespeare is heavy on a type of melodrama. In order to create that, you got to have those types of characters.
Yes.
Discovery hasn't done it. Strange New Worlds can do it. And I have a feeling that if they do this properly, Sybok and Captain Angel can be that.
Mm-hmm. You can make the pirates themselves their version of that faction that basically constantly comes back for the Enterprise.
Yeah. All right. So this does bring us to the end of our discussion. I mean, I don't really have much more to say in the way of final thoughts other than the fact that I felt like this episode was strong. It wasn't the strongest overall of all the episodes to date. I'd probably say it might be the weakest, which is...
Yeah.
Which,
I agree with you with that one.
Which isn't a negative. Because the Spock stuff, if the entire episode was the Spock stuff, then it probably would have been 100%. But Story B, though it brought levity, there were a lot of assumptions just being made.
Yes.
The pirate crew are bumbling idiots that they can easily be manipulated to create a mutiny.
Oh, but come on, Mike. If you had Captain Pike, if you met Captain Pike and he tried to actually coerce you to become on his side, wouldn't you go to Captain Pike's side?
Yeah, but that's not what he was doing. He was trying to manipulate people in a very juvenile way that I find it hard to believe anyone would fall victim to such an obvious manipulative tactic. That stuff I struggled with. It wasn't horrible because it was so...
It wasn't
I'm a little divided on that, Dave, because the average viewer in me is like, it worked. You know, it brought a level of levity that needed to be there. It brought back a bit of a campy slapstick vibe that's a part of this era. Let's just be honest. The original series.
The original series.
So I did like it, but as a reviewer and breaking down the script, there were some issues with Story B.
Yes.
So with that being said, I'm going to give this episode an 86% on the RMD score.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not far off because you hit it on the head. Some of the stuff, I mean, the Spock stuff just left me so giddy.
It was perfect.
It was perfect. I mean, the only thing I think you could have done more is make more allusions that we as the audience and Star Trek fans could come to that conclusion naturally that Spock did, that basically when he deduced that the person that basically Captain Angel was referring to wasn't someone that they were originally referring to. Mm-hmm. It was his brother.
Right.
If they did a little bit more of that, I'm like you. I think there would have been 100%. But then you throw in the campiness of the B subplot line, and the strength of that one was solely just enjoying Anson Mount's performance as Captain Pike.
Yeah, and it's hard to hate on that.
And it's hard to hate on him.
It's hard to hate on the great interplay between Pike and his crew.
Pike and his crew.
That's why I'm so divided and conflicted. And
that's why I'm very close to your score. I know you gave it an 86. I gave this one an 88.
Okay.
I know it's not perfect, but I still really enjoyed my time with the episode.
David, this isn't a bad percentage. 86 and 88 still solid. It's just not. The last episode we graded was 98%.
98%.
Yeah.
Because that was a really good episode, just critically.
Yeah. All right. So just as a quick reminder, we do have a Patreon page. If you go to patreon.com/RainmanDigital, you can pledge $5 or more a month. And by doing so, you will gain access to an entire gamut of exclusive content dedicated to Star Trek. We talk about lots of different things. If you like this show that we do weekly, then you're simply getting more of what you like. So go to patreon.com/RainmanDigital and pledge. It helps us stay on the air. We are an independent operation that does corporate level podcasting. I guess that's the best way of saying it.
I think that's the best way. Yeah.
Quality and content. We definitely compete with the big boys, but financially, we don't. So we do need the help. And that's why I urge everyone to go to patreon.com/RainmanDigital and pledge. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Live long and prosper.